Now, my first guest, who I can look at him,
Me too.
and for some reason get the giggles. As you know, he's
Make wimpy look skimpy.
Well, you see, I'm fat and you're ugly, but I can diet.
an Emmy Award-winning performer. On Tuesday night, May 25th, he's hosting a special along with you.
Sitting in your living room, watching your favorite late-night talk show host chat with Hollywood's biggest stars. They're all smiles, perfect teeth, and charming stories. But what if I told you that America's most beloved TV host, Johnny Carson, kept a secret list of celebrities he thought were truly terrible people? What if behind those bright lights and fake smiles, some of your favorite stars were actually monsters? For 30 long years, Johnny Carson welcomed the biggest names in Hollywood into millions of American homes. With his warm smile and easy laugh, he made viewers feel like they were watching old friends catch up. But when those cameras stopped rolling and the audience went home, Carson's friendly smile often disappeared completely. The truth is, America's favorite host kept a mental blacklist of guests he considered genuinely evil human beings. A former Tonight Show producer who worked with Carson for over 10 years revealed something shocking. He said that Johnny was the ultimate professional when the cameras were on, but the minute they cut to commercial, he would sometimes lean over to his sidekick Ed McMahon and whisper, "That person should never be near a camera or a child." Those words send chills down your spine, don't they? In his final years, Carson became more open about the celebrities he had secretly despised throughout his incredible career. The stories he told to close friends paint a disturbing picture of beloved icons who were actually monsters hiding behind their carefully crafted public images. These weren't just difficult personalities or demanding stars throwing tantrums. According to Carson, these were genuinely dark people using their fame and talent to hide their true nature. They were predators, bullies, and manipulators who the entertainment industry protected for decades. The most shocking revelation was about one legendary AC, Tress, who appeared sweet and vulnerable when she sat on Carson's famous couch. But backstage, she had verbally attacked a young production assistant so viciously that security guard had to step in to stop her. And there was a beloved male star who Carson caught doing something so disturbing in his dressing room that the host nearly called the police. These stories will change how you see some of Hollywood's most famous faces forever. Let me tell you about the first name on Carson's secret list, a woman who earned his most intense dislike through a private backstage confrontation that no one has ever revealed until now. Joan Crawford was Hollywood royalty, the glamorous queen with eyes flowing through her veins instead of blood. When she appeared on The Tonight Show in 1970, viewers at home saw the gracious Hollywood legend they had admired for decades. With her perfect posture, flawless appearance, and practiced charm, Crawford represented everything magical about old Hollywood glamour. But according to multiple Tonight Show staff members, Crawford's behavior when the cameras weren't rolling revealed a completely different person lurking beneath that beautiful surface. Years later, Carson told his biographer that Crawford was one of the coldest people he had ever interviewed. He said talking to her was like having a conversation with a beautiful statue that had absolutely nothing inside. The problems with Crawford started long before she even stepped foot in the studio. Her list of demands was so detailed and specific that the show's technical director kept the 4-page memo in his files for decades afterward, like evidence of her impossible behavior. Everything had to be absolutely perfect, a former producer remembered. The exact angle of her chair, the precise height of Johnny's desk, and even the temperature of the entire studio had to be exactly 67 degrees. Not 66, not 68, but exactly 67 degrees. When Crawford finally arrived 3 hours before they started filming, she brought her own team of makeup artists, even though the show already had award-winning makeup professionals on staff. But what truly revealed Crawford's ugly character was how differently she treated people based on how important she thought they were. A stagehand who was there that day said she practically bowed down to Johnny like he was royalty. But when a young production assistant accidentally walked into her dressing room with the water she had specifically requested, Crawford completely exploded with rage. According to multiple people who witnessed this terrible scene, Crawford launched into such a vicious attack that staff members walking by in the hallway literally froze in shock. She allegedly called the assistant, who was just a 20-year-old woman starting her career in television, a brainless little witch, and suggested she should go find work at a place where being stupid might actually help her. The poor young woman ran away in tears, and Crawford demanded that she be fired immediately. Carson's producer refused to fire the innocent assistant, which created tension that lasted throughout the entire show. But the most disturbing thing about Crawford's appearance wasn't just how cruelly she treated the staff. It was the calculating, robotic way she completely transformed the moment those cameras turned on. One producer said she was like a machine pretending to be a human being. She had rehearsed every single answer, every laugh, every supposedly spontaneous moment. Nothing about her was real or genuine. During commercial breaks, Crawford would immediately drop her fake smile and sit in stone-faced silence, refusing to speak to anyone around her. Then the instant that red light came back on, she would come alive again like someone had flipped a switch. Carson, who was famous for his ability to make any guest feel comfortable and relaxed, struggled to find any authentic connection with this cold, calculating woman. After the show ended, Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon, "I've interviewed dead bodies that had more personality than her." Years later, when Crawford's adopted daughter Christina wrote her shocking memoir called Mommy Dearest, which revealed Joan's alleged abuse of her children, Carson wasn't surprised at all. According to his close friends, he simply nodded and said, "I saw who she really was during those few hours we spent together." I believe every single word of that book. But if Crawford's cold, calculating behavior made Carson uncomfortable, his next problem guest represented something he found even more disturbing: raw power being used to intimidate and threaten innocent people. Frank Sinatra, the legendary singer known as Old Blue Eyes, appeared to have a cordial, even friendly relationship with Johnny Carson whenever viewers saw them together on television. The famous crooner would joke around, tell entertaining stories, and occasionally perform his hit songs while Carson played the respectful host. Behind the scenes, however, Carson reportedly held a deep dislike for Sinatra. It wasn't because of his incredible talent, which Carson genuinely respected, but because of how terribly Sinatra treated people when he thought no one important was watching. Carson once told a friend, according to multiple biographies, if Frank couldn't sing, he would definitely be working as a mob enforcer. And sometimes, I think he was both a singer and an enforcer. Or at the same time. Those are pretty scary words coming from America's most beloved talk show host. Sinatra's appearances on The Tonight Show were notorious among the crew members because of the uncomfortable tension they created throughout the entire studio. According to longtime staff members, Sinatra would arrive with a group of up to 8 intimidating men who were described as definitely not show business types. They looked more like the kind of guys you wouldn't want to meet alone in a dark alley. These scary men would spread throughout the studio, silently watching the staff and creating what one cameraman described as feeling like being under constant surveillance by dangerous people. But what truly disturbed Carson was witnessing how Sinatra treated people he considered beneath him. During one appearance in the early 1970s, a floor manager made the innocent mistake of giving Sinatra the standard 3-minute warning before his segment was supposed to begin. According to several people who saw this happen, Sinatra grabbed the poor man by his necktie and pulled him close, saying in a threatening voice, "Nobody tells me when I have 3 minutes. I'll go on stage when I'm good and ready, not a second before." The floor manager, who was a Korean War veteran in his 50s, was visibly shaken and scared after this confrontation. When Carson saw this bullying interaction on his office monitor, he almost canceled Sinatra's entire segment. Only his producer's reminder about the huge television ratings that Sinatra would bring convinced Carson to continue with the show. Another major source of tension was Sinatra's complete unreliability. He would cancel his appearances at the last minute multiple times, including one incident where he canceled just 2 hours before they were supposed to start filming, even though he was already inside the building. He just decided he wasn't in the mood to perform that day, leaving everyone scrambling to fill the time. The most revealing moment happened during a commercial break when Sinatra made a nasty, disrespectful comment about a female staff member's appearance, speaking loud enough for everyone nearby to hear his cruel words. Carson, breaking his usual professional calm, coldly responded, "We don't talk about my staff that way in this place." The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife, with Sinatra visibly surprised that anyone, even the great Johnny Carson, would dare to challenge his behavior. When the cameras came back on, both men maintained their professional facades and acted like nothing had happened. But crew members noticed that Carson's questions became much shorter and far less engaged for the rest of the interview. After that particular appearance, Carson reportedly told his producer, "I don't care what kind of television ratings he brings. Limit Frank Sinatra to appearing on this show once a year at most." This was significant because Carson rarely got involved in booking decisions and almost never banned guests completely. For him to restrict Sinatra's appearances spoke volumes about his personal disgust with the singer's bullying behavior. While Sinatra represented the intimidating, bullying side of celebrity power, Carson's next problematic guest demonstrated a different kind of difficulty, an overwhelming ego that recognized no boundaries, rules, or respect for other people's shows. Orson Welles was undeniably one of the greatest creative geniuses in entertainment history. He appeared on The Tonight Show multiple times during Carson's era, always creating memorable television with his booming voice, larger-than-life presence, and remarkable stories from his legendary career. Viewers at home saw a charming, brilliant storyteller who had created some of cinema's greatest masterpieces. Carson and his staff, however, saw something completely different. A man whose enormous ego had grown so massive that he believed the normal rules of television simply didn't apply to someone as important as him. "Never book him again," Carson reportedly said after one particularly difficult Welles appearance. "That guy thinks he's still the Emperor of Rome, and everyone else should bow down to him." The problems with Welles typically began before he even arrived at the studio. According to Tonight Show writers, Welles would routinely dismiss any prepared questions or discussion topics that Carson's talented team had carefully developed for the interview. One former writer recalled, "Orson told us that our questions were pedestrian and obvious, like something a high school student would ask. He literally crossed out every single question and handed us back a completely empty page." This put Carson in the extremely uncomfortable position of having to interview one of cinema's most significant and important figures with absolutely no preparation or framework to guide the conversation. This was a particular challenge because Welles had a tendency to launch into extremely long, meandering stories that were nearly impossible to edit for time constraints. During one appearance in the mid-1970s, Welles was scheduled for a brief 7-minute segment with Carson. Instead, he stayed planted on that couch for nearly 25 minutes, completely ignoring multiple subtle cues from Carson that it was time to wrap up the interview and move on. A director explained, Johnny had a whole series of hand signals he would give to guests when time was running short. Orson saw every single one of those signals and just kept talking like he owned the place. We had to completely cancel 2 other guests who were supposed to appear that night. Welles's behavior toward the hardworking staff was equally dismissive and disrespectful. He reportedly refused to speak directly to production assistants, instead addressing them in the third person even when they were standing right beside him. He would say things like, "Tell the girl I need more water," or "Ask the boy to adjust that light," treating grown professionals like they were invisible servants. What particularly irritated Carson, according to people who knew him well, was Welles's habit of treating The Tonight Show like it was his own personal platform rather than Carson's carefully crafted program. Orson would bring his own props without permission, change topics without any warning, and even attempt to direct camera shots from his seat on the couch. A former producer explained, "He once actually stood up during the middle of filming and tried to tell our experienced camera operators which angles they should be using." Johnny was absolutely furious, but had to maintain his professional composure. After one particularly challenging appearance where Welles had basically taken over the entire show, Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon, "Being a genius doesn't excuse everything. Being brilliant doesn't give anyone the right to completely hijack someone else's television program." Carson, who was himself a perfectionist about television production, found Welles's complete disregard for the medium's constraints especially infuriating. Though he maintained public respect for Welles's immense contributions to film and theater, privately, he began to view the man as a cautionary tale of what happens when incredible talent gets completely eclipsed by an out-of-control ego. While Welles represented the challenge of trying to contain an oversized personality, Carson's next difficult guest brought a completely different problem. Unpredictable behavior that could quickly turn hostile and create an extremely uncomfortable atmosphere for everyone involved. Bette Davis was Hollywood's queen of sharp-tongued verbal warfare. When she appeared on The Tonight Show, audiences saw the legendary actress at her most engaging, telling witty stories in her distinctive voice, looking elegant even in her later years, and sharing fascinating behind-the-scenes Hollywood history. What viewers didn't see were the moments before and after the cameras were rolling, when Davis reportedly revealed a personality so abrasive and cutting that even the usually unflappable Carson was taken completely off guard. Bette doesn't need a stage to perform on. She needs a courtroom, Carson allegedly told Ed McMahon after one particularly difficult appearance. No one should have to be cross-examined by Bette Davis without having a lawyer present to protect them. Davis's first major offense, according to multiple Tonight Show staff accounts, was her treatment of other guests who were appearing on the same episodes. When she was booked on shows with multiple celebrities, Davis would often rudely interrupt or talk over them, especially if they were younger performers or women she saw as competition. One former talent coordinator recalled, she would physically turn her back on other guests sitting on the couch, like they didn't exist. If someone else was telling a story that got laughs from the audience, you could literally see her seething with anger and jealousy, planning exactly how she was going to regain control of the conversation and steal the spotlight back. Behind the scenes, Davis's behavior was even more problematic and offensive. She reportedly demanded whiskey in her dressing room before every appearance. While this wasn't particularly unusual for guests from her era, her alcohol consumption sometimes led to completely inappropriate comments and behavior that shocked everyone around her. According to female staff members who worked on the show during the 1970s, Davis regularly used sexist and racist language that was shocking even by the much more lenient standards of that time period. One makeup artist recalled Davis refusing her professional services and asking instead for someone whose hands don't shake like they're coming off a 3-day drinking bender. This kind of cruel, personal attack was typical of how Davis treated the hard-working people who were just trying to do their jobs and make her look good on television. Carson, who generally avoided confrontation and tried to keep things peaceful, made a rare exception for Davis when she began viciously berating a cue card holder for being too slow during a rehearsal. Johnny actually stepped in personally, remembered a production assistant who witnessed this incident. He very quietly but firmly told her, "Miss Davis, on this show we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." She was completely stunned by this, probably because she wasn't used to being challenged by anyone, but she immediately backed down and apologized. What made Davis particularly difficult for Carson was the stark contrast between her undeniable talent and her cruel treatment of others. Unlike some difficult guests who could be dismissed as talentless troublemakers, Davis was a genuine legend whose work Carson truly admired and respected. This made her behavior even more disappointing and frustrating. After Davis's final appearance on the show in the early 1980s, Carson reported, DeLay told his producer, "That's the absolute last time we book her. Life is too short to spend it being verbally attacked and insulted by Bette Davis, no matter how many Academy Awards she is sitting on her shelf." While Davis at least directed her sharp tongue at adults who could defend themselves, Carson's next problematic guest brought a different and more disturbing kind of discomfort. Inappropriate behavior toward young women that crossed professional boundaries in ways that made everyone extremely uncomfortable. Mickey Rooney was Hollywood royalty, the #1 box office star from 1939 to 1941, and a living connection to the industry's golden age. His appearances on The Tonight Show should have been nostalgic celebrations of an incredibly illustrious career that spanned decades. Instead, according to multiple staff accounts, Rooney's visits became notorious among the crew for his inappropriate behavior, chaotic energy, and occasional obvious intoxication. Mickey thinks being short gives him a license to be a creepy old man. Carson reportedly told his producer after one particularly problematic appearance in the mid-1970s. Rooney, who was then in his mid-50s, developed a terrible reputation among female staff members for unwanted touching, suggestive comments, and completely ignoring professional boundaries that should have been obvious to anyone. According to multiple disturbing accounts, young production assistants would actually ask to be reassigned to different duties when they learned that Rooney was booked to appear on an upcoming show. One former assistant who worked on the show in the late 1970s recalled, "He would grab your hand when you brought him a glass of water and try to pull you closer to him. He would ask personal questions like whether you were married or had a boyfriend. If you tried to leave and do your job, he would hold onto your wrist just a little too long, making you feel trapped and uncomfortable." Even more concerning was Rooney's apparent inability to recognize when he had consumed too much alcohol before appearing on live television. According to Tonight Show employees, he appeared visibly drunk during at least 3 separate appearances, slurring his words badly and losing his train of thought right in the middle of sentences. During one infamous segment in 1977, Rooney began telling what should have been a sweet story about his late friend Judy Garland, but quickly became inappropriate and uncomfortable, forcing Carson to cut him off and desperately pivot to a completely different topic. During the commercial break that followed, Carson reportedly asked his producer, "Is Mickey drunk? Or is this just who he has become now that he's older?" What made Rooney particularly difficult for Carson to handle was the generational gap in understanding what constituted appropriate professional behavior. Born in 1920, Rooney came from an era of Hollywood where certain types of conduct toward women were commonplace, if not actually encouraged by the studio system that a director who worked on the show for many years explained. Johnny was certainly no prude, but he had very clear lines about professional conduct and treating people with respect. Rooney seemed genuinely confused when anyone Kaye D him out on his behavior, like he honestly didn't understand why his actions were a problem or why people were upset. After one particular appearance where Rooney made repeated uncomfortable comments about a young actress who was also appearing on that night's show, Carson took the highly unusual step of personally apologizing to her after the filming was completed. The director recalled, "I had never seen Johnny so embarrassed and angry about a guest's behavior in all my years working with him." He told her directly, "That is not how professionals behave on my show, and I promise you it will never happen again." True to his word, Rooney's appearances became much less frequent in the late 1970s and early 1980s, with Carson reportedly insisting on daytime pre-recorded segments rather than live evening broadcasts whenever Rooney was booked. This was Carson's way of maintaining better control over the situation and protecting his staff from uncomfortable interactions. While Rooney's inappropriate behavior created deeply uncomfortable situations for staff members, Carson's next challenging guest brought a completely different kind of difficulty. Demands so extensive and unreasonable that they became absolutely legendary among everyone who worked on the show. Zsa Zsa Gabor, with her glamorous appearance, distinctive Hungarian accent, and flirtatious personality, was a Tonight Show favorite who appeared dozens of times during Carson's long tenure as host. Viewers at home saw a charming, over-the-top personality who played up her exotic background and numerous marriages for laughs and entertainment. Behind the scenes, according to countless staff accounts, Gabor was one of the most demanding and difficult guests in the entire history of the show. "I would honestly rather try to interview an angry cat," Carson reportedly said after a particularly exhausting Gabor appearance. At least the cat wouldn't need 3 personal assistants and special lighting equipment flown in from Los Angeles. Gabor's impossible demands began long before she ever arrived at the studio. According to former Tonight Show employees, her standard list of requirements was absolutely ridiculous and included things like a specific temperature in her dressing room that had to be exactly 74 degrees, fresh flowers that had to be orchids only with absolutely no carnations allowed, a bottle of expensive Perrier water with exactly 3 ice cubes, and her own personal lighting technician flown in at the show's expense. But perhaps most demanding of all, she insisted that no female guests who were younger than 40 years old could be booked on the same episode as her. A former talent coordinator remembered, "Her requirements list read like a parody of celebrity demands. We honestly thought someone was playing a practical joke on us the first time we received it." When these specific requirements weren't met to her exact standards, Gabor would reportedly refuse to leave her dressing room until every single situation was corrected to her satisfaction, often delaying the filming and throwing off the entire show's carefully planned schedule. One of the most infamous incidents occurred when Gabor arrived for a scheduled taping and discovered that the makeup department didn't have her preferred brand of foundation. According to multiple witnesses, she immediately got into a screaming match with the head makeup artist, demanding that someone be sent to Beverly Hills immediately to purchase the correct product, regardless of how long it would take or how much it would cost. A former producer remembered, Johnny actually had to personally enter Vinay and call Gabor directly. He said something like, "Zsa Zsa, honey, you look absolutely beautiful already, and we have a show to film. Let's save the cosmetics emergency for another day." What particularly annoyed Carson about Gabor's outrageous behavior was how it affected the overall production and everyone else involved. Other guests would be kept waiting for hours, crew members would have to work expensive overtime, and the show's carefully planned schedule would be thrown into complete chaos. After one appearance where Gabor arrived 40 minutes late and then had the nerve to complain about how Carson had introduced her to the audience, Carson reportedly told his executive producer, "Next time she wants to be on the show, tell her we've renamed it The Tonight Show starring Zsa Zsa Gabor, and I'll be happy to work as her sidekick." Despite all these frustrations and headaches, Gabor continued to appear on the show throughout Carson's entire tenure, which was a testament to her undeniable entertainment value when the cameras were actually rolling and she was performing for the audience. While Gabor's ridiculous diva demands created major logistical headaches for the production team, Carson's next challenging guest brought a different kind of serious discomfort. Unpredictable behavior that could quickly turn a lighthearted, fun interview into an extremely uncomfortable confrontation that left everyone feeling awkward. Shelley Winters was a two-time Academy Award winner with an impressive career that spanned several decades, from glamorous leading lady roles in her youth to memorable character parts in her later years. On paper, she should have been an absolutely ideal Tonight Show guest. Experienced in television, accomplished in her field, and full of fascinating Hollywood stories that audiences would love to hear. In reality, according to those who actually worked on the show, Winters was one of Carson's most unpredictable and potentially explosive guests. Shelley doesn't just talk during interviews, she detonates like a bomb, Carson reportedly said after one particularly intense appearance. Winters became infamous among the show's staff for her complete inability or unwillingness to adapt to the light, entertainment-focused format that made late-night television so popular with viewers. Rather than sharing amusing anecdotes about her career or promoting her current projects like most guests did, she would often launch into passionate political speeches or deeply personal revelations that left Carson visibly uncomfortable and scrambling to regain control. During one appearance in the mid-1970s, what began as Carson asking a simple, innocent question about a recent film quickly evolved into Winters delivering a 5-minute uninterrupted lecture about government corruption and political conspiracy theories, leaving Carson desperately struggling to find a way to transition to a commercial break without being rude. A former director recalled, Johnny was an absolute master of controlling conversations and keeping interviews on track. But with Shelley, it was like trying to steer a tornado once it gets going. All he could do was wait for her to run out of steam and hope for the best. Winters' unpredictability wasn't limited to just her conversational topics, either. She became WL, known for physical outbursts and dramatic gestures that could happen without any warning. In one infamous incident that happened on a British talk show, she actually threw a full glass of whiskey directly into fellow guest Oliver Reed's face after he made some sexist comments that angered her. This reputation for sudden volatility made Tonight Show staff members genuinely nervous whenever she was booked to appear, the former stage manager admitted. We would actually remove certain items from the set when we knew Shelley was coming to be a guest. Anything that could potentially be thrown, knocked over, or used as a weapon would mysteriously disappear before her segments began. Despite these serious challenges, What distinguished Winters from some of Carson's other difficult guests was that her problematic behavior seemed to stem from genuine passion and conviction rather than simple malice, ego, or deliberate cruelty. She cared deeply about political and social issues that mattered to her, and she saw every single public appearance as an important opportunity to address these concerns, regardless of whether the venue was appropriate for such discussions. Carson, while visibly uncomfortable during her more intense and political moments, maintained a certain level of respect for Winters' obvious authenticity and sincerity. After one particularly fiery appearance where she harshly criticized the Vietnam War, Carson reportedly told his producer, "I may not want to go on vacation with Shelley, but at least she means every single word she says, which is more than I can say for most of our guests." Nevertheless, Winters' appearances became noticeably less frequent during the later years of Carson's tenure, with the host clearly preferring guests whose conversational style complemented rather than challenged the show's established format. While Winters' passionate unpredictability created significant on-air challenges, Carson's next difficult guest represented something he found personally distasteful: extreme political views that specifically targeted and attacked vulnerable communities. Jane Russell was one of Hollywood's most iconic and celebrated sex symbols of the 1940s and 1950s, known for groundbreaking films like The Outlaw and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. With her striking beauty and significant place in film history, she seemed like a natural recurring guest for The Tonight Show who would have fascinating stories to share. Yet after just a few appearances in the early 1970s, Russell rarely returned to Carson's famous couch again, a decision that, according to show insiders, stemmed directly from Carson's deep discomfort with her increasingly extreme political views and her reported cruel treatment of LGBTQ staff members. Carson, while personally maintaining moderate Republican views for much of his life, had established a strict policy of keeping The Tonight Show relatively neutral on divisive political issues that might alienate viewers. Russell, however, reportedly used her backstage interactions to express redline conservative views that Carson found deeply troubling and offensive. A former producer explained, "Johnny could definitely handle guests having different political opinions from his own. What really bothered him was when those opinions turned into personal attacks on staff members or other guests who couldn't defend themselves." According to several detailed accounts, Russell became notorious for making disparaging and hurtful comments about LGBTQ individuals working on the show. During one appearance in the early 1970s, she allegedly refused to allow a gay makeup artist to touch her face, demanding a replacement and making cruel comments about his sexual orientation. Even more concerning to Carson was a reported incident involving the legendary Rock Hudson. According to a talent coordinator who worked on the show during that period, Russell refused to be booked on the same episode as Hudson, making derogatory comments about his sexuality, which, though not publicly acknowledged at the time, was well known within Hollywood circles. That a former talent coordinator recalled, Johnny had many close friends in the gay community, including several valued staff members. He was genuinely ahead of his time in not tolerating that kind of discrimination and hatred on his show. Carson's final breaking point with Russell allegedly came during a 1973 appearance when she made dismissive and racist comments about civil rights legislation during a commercial break. Though her remarks weren't picked up by the broadcast microphones, they were clearly overheard by several crew members and quickly reached Carson's ears. After that particular appearance, Russell was completely absent from The Tonight Show's guest roster for the remainder of Carson's 30-year tenure. This was one of the very few clear cases where Carson appears to have personally vetoed all future bookings. What made this situation particularly notable was Carson's general reluctance to ban guests outright, especially those with Russell's level of star power and historical significance to Hollywood. For him to take such a definitive and permanent stance spoke volumes about how strongly he objected to her behavior and beliefs. While Russell's politics and cruel treatment of staff created a permanent rift with Carson, his final and perhaps most intense dislike was reserved for a comedian whose cheerful public persona and private behavior were reportedly completely opposite from each other. Jerry Lewis was one of America's most successful entertainers, a groundbreaking comedian, actor, director, and humanitarian who became famous for his annual televised charity drives benefiting muscular dystrophy research. His manic energy and innovative physical comedy had made him a global superstar who was beloved by millions of fans. Behind the scenes, according to numerous Tonight Show staff accounts, Lewis was also one of the most difficult, demeaning, and cruel celebrities in all of Hollywood, a terrible reputation that earned him a special place at the very top of Carson's personal blacklist. Jerry is what happens when someone's ego grows much bigger than their actual talent. Carson reportedly told a colleague after a particularly troublesome Lewis appearance in the mid-1970s. Unlike some difficult guests who saved their worst behavior for lower-level employees and underlings, Lewis reportedly made no secret whatsoever of his complete disdain for Carson himself. During one infamous appearance that people still talk about, decades later, Lewis repeatedly interrupted and talked over Carson, hijacked questions that were intended for other guests, and at one shocking point actually reached over and adjusted Carson's necktie, without permission, a move that visibly annoyed the normally unflappable host, a former producer explained. Johnny absolutely hated people touching him without his permission. It was a well-known rule among everyone who worked with him. You simply don't touch Johnny unless he initiates the contact first. Lewis knew this rule perfectly well and violated it anyway as a deliberate power move to show dominance. Lewis's treatment of the hard-working crew members was allegedly even worse than his disrespect toward Carson. According to several accounts, he would refuse to learn staff members' names, referring to them dismissively as, "Hey, you," or simply by their job function, like camera guy or makeup girl, regardless of their years of experience or seniority in the industry. One particularly disturbing incident occurred when a veteran camera operator reportedly coughed quietly during Lewis's rehearsal. According to multiple witnesses who were present, Lewis stopped everything and launched into a screaming tirade, yelling that the cameraman was a so-called professional who breathes like an amateur and demanding that he be immediately removed from the studio. A floor manager who witnessed this incident confirmed, Jerry actually screamed at a camera operator for breathing too loudly during rehearsal. Not for talking or making noise, but literally for breathing. The poor guy had seasonal allergies and couldn't help it. What Carson found most objectionable about Lewis was the stark, disturbing contrast between his public persona as a tireless champion for children with disabilities and his private behavior toward people who couldn't possibly benefit his career in any way. A producer who worked closely with Carson recalled, "The fake saint act made Johnny's skin crawl. He would watch Jerry cry on his charity telethon about how much he loved helping children, then come to our show and treat regular working people like they were subhuman garbage." After Lewis's final appearance on The Tonight Show in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly told his executive producer simply and definitively, "Never book him again. Not ever." Though Carson rarely banned guests outright during his entire career, Lewis joined the very small group of celebrities who were effectively blacklisted from the show during its final decade. Years later, when someone asked Carson about Lewis at a private dinner party, Carson reportedly said something that shocked everyone present with its uncharacteristic harshness and anger. He said, "In a town absolutely full of fake people and phonies, Jerry Lewis stands out as genuinely hateful, and that takes some real doing." Johnny Carson's secret blacklist of these 9 difficult guests reveals something important about Hollywood's true nature behind all the carefully maintained glamour and charm. For 30 incredible years, every major star had to go through Carson to reach the American public. As one longtime Tonight Show producer explained, Johnny saw absolutely everything. He knew who was genuine and who was just faking it for the cameras. What makes Carson's private assessments particularly valuable and trustworthy is that he had no reason to exaggerate negative stories or invent problems that didn't exist. Unlike tabloid journalists or disgruntled employees with personal access to grind, Carson was at the absolute pinnacle of the entertainment industry. He had nothing to gain by criticizing these celebrities and everything to lose if his honesty damaged important relationships with potential guests. As his former producer noted, Johnny wasn't looking to make enemies with anyone. Just the opposite, he wanted every single interview to go smoothly and successfully. When he genuinely disliked someone, it was because they had made it completely impossible not to. Perhaps most revealing is how Carson distinguished between guests who were merely difficult and those he considered truly problematic. He could tolerate eccentricity, nervousness, and even moderate ego, understanding that these traits often came with the territory of fame and success. What he absolutely couldn't stand was cruelty, especially toward people with less power and influence. His longtime director remembered, Johnny had a very simple test for judging someone's true character. He would watch how they treated the young pages, the assistants, and the camera operators. That behavior told him everything he needed to know about what kind of person they really were deep down inside. The most sobering aspect of Carson's blacklist is how effectively the old studio system protected these celebrities, despite their terrible behavior being well known to industry insiders for years. Long before social media and cancel culture existed, stars could maintain pristine public images while behaving absolutely terribly in private, secure in the knowledge that the studios, television networks, and entertainment publications all had major financial interests in maintaining their marketability and keeping their secrets hidden, as one former Tonight Show writer observed. Today, one cell phone video of bad behavior could end someone's career overnight. Back then, a celebrity could literally throw a chair at an innocent assistant, and as long as they continued to sell movie tickets, that story would never leave the building. As we look back on Hollywood's so-called golden age with rose-colored nostalgia, Carson's brutally honest assessments serve as a valuable reminder that our cultural icons,